We got to talk about financing. We got to talk about budgets. And I'm going to dig into this particular topic more over the next few months because every school is going to be facing and has been facing really difficult budgetary shortfalls over the last few years. This is from more school choice. This is from a tightening state budgets, tightening federal budgets, changes. I mean, you're not alone. You're not alone. But we got to start coming up with a smart strategy on what we can do about these budgetary shortfalls. So today, what I want to talk about is, should schools outsource certain jobs, certain duties? And I've been at so many school board meetings. I go around the nation, and we're out there. We're an outsourced client, so I'm biased. Certain things you should outsource, certain things I think you shouldn't. But what are the rules? What are the parameters of when you should and when you shouldn't? Because I've heard some school board members make some really good arguments for insourcing and outsourcing, and then I've heard some really, really bad arguments. Like shouldn't we just be able to do this ourselves? Is not a reason to insource. And I think that the one thing that we've got to start to really get on board with here is that your school is a business. It is a business for good. It is a public benefit business for sure. Maybe you think about it like a nonprofit, but it is a business. Your job is to spend what you've got and to educate the children with the dollars you've got. And also to find other creative ways to reduce cost and to increase your budget. Today, we're just talking about outsourcing and whether or not you should outsource a duty like the transportation, the busing, or food services, or tutoring, or lawn maintenance. So kind of keep it in that space, right? Because I've seen these, Caroline, come up multiple school districts, especially in lawn care. They're always, should we insource or outsource that? I know it's an important decision. All right. So the first claim, and we got to watch out for this, is that outsourcing always saves money. The claim is that like private companies can do it cheaper and better, and that it's a no-brainer, right? That's not always true, right? In reality, it can save money, but only when it's done strategically. Now, what does that mean? What does strategery mean, right? People say that, they throw that word around, but they don't know what, a lot of people don't know what it means. Strategy is really this concept of thinking about the ways that it fails and then building workarounds and making sure it doesn't fail, right? So if you're going to outsource it, you got to think about the ways it doesn't work out well, and then you need to build really strong oversight and clear goals. And all too often, you may save some money, but you didn't set clear expectations and you didn't have an agreement on the front end. So before we outsource stuff here at our company, we like to insource and we outsource some stuff too. But the only time I outsource is, and I've made this mistake before, but I think ideally the ideal way to outsource is to make sure that expectations are clear on the front end of exactly what you expect for the money that you're changing hands, right? So oftentimes we don't get all that clarity, and then we end up spending more money fixing the fallout because of the bad vendor relationship. So we're going to kind of get into the parameters of what you should look for to make sure that you're not getting smashed in the face with a bad strategic decision, right? So what are the most common areas that I could discover that schools outsource? Okay, it doesn't mean you have to outsource them, but this is the most common. Transportation. Now, higher costs for buses, fuels, drivers, and insurance often make outsourcing pretty attractive. And so when we talk about busing, the one issue that I've seen that so many school leaders miss is the replacement cost of the vehicles. I heard this argument just the other day. I don't even remember what state I was in, to tell you the truth. But they said, how much does a bus cost? And they said, well, we're thinking about outsourcing this, but how much does a bus cost us? Can we not just buy 4 buses instead of paying them? Well, that's not the only cost. The cost for the bus is not the only issue. And so if your finance people aren't really digging into the total cost, you're really not comparing apples to apples. Now, it may make sense for you to buy all the equipment, maintain all the equipment, insure all the equipment, keep all the equipment running, and save enough money to replace all the equipment because everything depreciates in value, right? Or to outsource it. Now, if you're only saying what is the cost for a bus, you're not factoring in the cost for tires. Tires cost money. Fuel costs money. Things break down. Engines explode. You get flats. You get in wrecks, right? Are you going to self-insure all these vehicles, or are you going to have an insurance company cover? Because you have to factor in those costs too. So I guess what I'm saying is the first thing you need to do when you're thinking about outsourcing is make sure you actually have all the cost drivers for what it is. It's not just, well, hey, they're paying their bus driver $25 an hour. We can do that. But you got to pay to train the bus driver. You got to have a process to hire the bus driver. Then you got to make sure the bus driver doesn't do something dumb, right? And you got to manage that bus driver. So now you got to have a management team to cover this management. And sure, you may have a manager in charge of your vendors. That's a little less stressful than the manager of the direct employees. It just is. Managing a vendor typically is a little bit less burdensome from a time perspective because you have a contract and you have a lot of clarity, which maybe you should have that with all your employees, right? Landscape and maintenance is also outsourced quite a bit. And landscape and maintenance, especially in most areas of the company, is very seasonal, and labor and equipment are expensive to maintain, and there's spikes. And if you can get a vendor that can kind of flatten that cost out, maybe that works for you, right? But remember, you also have benefits that you got to cover for all these people. So if you want to buy 20 mowers, and by the way, a mower would be like 15, 20,000. I'm not even talking about for like the coup de grace mower. I mean, like good 0-turn, 60-inch deck. Boy, I know too much about this, right? I'm a dude. I got a lot of grass to mow, 60-inch deck. I mean, that'd be $12,000, $18,000. And then somebody's going to drive it off a curb and they're going to break it. It's going to happen. Who do you want responsible for that replacement cost? So if you can save so much money that you can also replace this equipment and fix this equipment, then maybe insourcing is the right target. But you cannot just ask, how much do they pay their employee to drive the mower? You got to ask, how much does a mower cost to service? How much does it cost to maintain? Who's going to insure the mower? Who's going to damage it? And once you start thinking more like that, you're going to realize that there could be a lot of cost involved in this. And then the other ones are custodial work, food services, tutoring and academic support, and mental health services. And those are all the biggest potential items that school districts have outsourced. So if you're not outsourcing those, you might want to start to compare apples to apples, see if there is a cost saver associated with any of those most typical buckets, I would say, if you're like the CFO. Now, I would say this, and let me speak just to the school board. What you need to consider is making sure that the finance people in-house are counting all that cost. Now, you as a school board member, typically part-time jobs, you don't have time. I don't think you should take the time to look into every little facet of cost. Just make sure that the accounting people are looking at all those costs. And what I have found is that they do. Like, they do a really good job. Most departments, they're figuring out all the costs. So don't try to simplify it if you're a school board member by saying, well, what's the cost of a bus? I mean, that's what I heard. I've heard it in 2 different districts. What's the cost of a bus? Or what's the cost of a mower? That was the other one. And it's like, well, that's not the only cost, man. Like there's literally spreadsheets on the depreciation cost. And once an item's depreciated, you've got to buy a new one. Now, is that in a year, 3 years, 2 years? I mean, the lawn maintenance, you got to buy line trimmers. You got to buy line for the line trimmers. I mean, all these things start to pile up on you. And yeah, maybe you can buy things in discounts and store it. Just, you got to factor, I guess what I'm saying is just make sure you're really factoring all the cost drivers so you can make a good decision based on apples to apples comparison, right? Now, what are some of the other reasons why you should consider to outsource, right? One, you lack in-house expertise or infrastructure. And the biggest example I've seen of this is behavioral health agencies and licensed therapists are expensive commodities to keep in-house. It's a big district. You keep them moving around. I think that. But that expertise is something that's been hard for a lot of districts to insource. Now, if you have insourced it and you've got really good behavioral therapists around, keep them, take care of them. A lot of districts are having a tough time with that. So some are outsourcing that. And that's a cost driver that's a little easier to calculate, unlike equipment. You got the person's hourly rate compared to what you would pay an hourly rate with benefits, pay time off, free time, pay time off, benefits, health insurance. If you have a pension fund or a PAC or a 401k, you got to count all those costs for an in-house person, and that has to be 12 months out of the year, because you cannot hire a person for 9 months and then boot them for 3 months. Well, or they're going to get unemployment every 3 months, so you have to factor that in, right? So when you're thinking about hiring staff, like we go back to this lawn maintenance thing, they're seasonal. You're not required to have all their benefits all the time, but you're paying a premium for that. Oh, let me say one other thing about when you're comparing apples to apples. Let's assume you figured out that you could insource everything for $100,000. Let's keep it a round number, right? $100,000 for the lawn care of all your schools. 100,000, just a real simple number. It's 100,000 like it's a simple. It's a big number. That's a lot of money. But some districts smaller, some bigger. $100,000, and you get a quote for a contractor that says they can do it for $32,000. Put a pin in that. And you get another one that says it'll cost $250,000. Put a pin in that. I'm going to ignore both of those quotes. I'm going to discount them automatically right from the start. One is so astronomically beyond what we can do it internally. I'm not saving any money. I don't care. I don't need Cadillacs when a great Ford or Chevy will get me there. So I don't know what that is. But the other one is so cheap. So cheap, it could cause problems. And I've got a few examples of those. So what I get nervous about are anything to the extremes, right? If it's $70,000, hey man, let's really talk about it. Let's make sure it's in the contract. Let's make sure you can do it. It's $110,000, $120,000. Maybe I didn't count everything, or maybe it's just easier for me to outsource it than I don't have time to scale, or I can't find the right people, but it seems like it's within the realm of reality, right? So at least knowing what you'd insource it for gives you kind of a baseline. So get a baseline, I think is my pro tip here, right? Another reason why you might need to outsource is if you have to rapidly scale. So think about like bringing on a tutoring firm, and this is bias for us, if you need to bring on a firm to deal with chronic absenteeism and find all your kidlets, and you have to do it really short order, especially like for the beginning of the school year. Like why, we had 10,000 students enrolled, but they didn't show up. Where are they? And that's a short-term capacity issue, right? That would make sense to kind of outsource, right? But if it's a continual process, we need somebody year-round calling parents, that might be something you consider insourcing, right? I would say outsourcing does allow you to have predictable and stable costs for things. So a transportation contract where the vendor is absorbing everything, yeah. And I just did this with a vendor. A vendor wanted to charge me a flat fee, like a monthly fee. Every month the fee. Every month they're going to want their money. Right, just like the mob, they always want their money, right? And so, but they also had this section called that we are responsible for all their expenses, travel, hotels, and I went, nope, absolutely not. So I paid them how much more? I paid them 12% more than the monthly note, but I said you're responsible for all your expenses. If you can do it cheaper and save money, you get to keep it, but I am not going to be in the management of your expenses. I don't want to have to find you flights. I don't want to judge whether or not you got a nice hotel but not too nice of a hotel. I don't want to be in that game. I don't have time for it. So sometimes when you want standard, predictable, stable cost, you may pay a little bit more, which is a lot to stomach for public schools right now. That's a lot to ask, but you can plan for it better. And I would really trust your CFOs, your experts, your controllers, because they're the ones burdened with trying to predict budgets and all that stuff. So really lean on them heavily. What I found is almost all the CFOs I've dealt with at school systems care about using the money effectively. So just make sure they're factoring all the costs, and your job is absolutely to ask tough questions, right? Now, if you're looking for performance-based accountability, you can do that insource or outsource, right? But either way, you need like surveys, right? So let's take a custodian, like a clue, like is your place clean, right? And you can just have the teachers rank it. Yes, no, right? You're 1-star, 5-star, whatever. But you should do that same benchmark. The issue is, who do you feel more comfortable disciplining? Maybe that's the way. Is it an internal team? Or is it an external team? I don't know. Just think about it. Now, when's it risky? When should you really dodge outsourcing as an issue? One, You got to watch outsourcing that could cause labor disputes or internal disciplinary problems, right? Which can create more conflict in the long term. So yeah, I mean, if like you're heavily unionized, you ought to talk to the unions before you jump into something like this, because you don't want a bunch of NLRB actions, National Labor Relations Acts, and fights and lawsuits. And you also want to destroy the morale of the people you've got. You want to support them, not want to take away from them. Now, in a lot of cases, you're not in the look. It's a business. You're not in the creating jobs business. And I'm sorry if I'm the first one to tell you that. You're not here to create jobs for people. That is not what the point of public education is. It's to educate children. But you need all the great team members to do that. But you got to keep the main thing the main thing. All right. So, but you don't want to create unnecessary labor disputes for no reason. So communicate early and often about your intent. If you cannot, this is point 2 when it might be too risky. If you can't manage the vendors, I mean, actively manage. And God bless, we just made this mistake. We outsourced a particular task. It was to an out-of-state shop to just do some backdoor stuff for us. And we didn't have anybody monitor them or manage them. And it was about 2 months in, and my teammates said, well, they're doing a terrible job. And then we realized there was nobody coaching them, nobody managing them, nobody trying to make sure the contract was successful. And so I feel like that's our fail as much as the vendor fail. So if you can't actively manage it, don't outsource it, right? You've got to stay on top of these. You can't just set it and forget a vendor. Now, I know that managing people is tough, and we want to outsource to get away from always having to manage people, but you still got to manage the vendors. There's no way to get around it. And then the third reason why you may not want to outsource is if the role is so core to student culture that it would create a disruption for the students. And, like take cafeteria workers. Sometimes those get outsourced, but oftentimes, and this can happen with a vendor too, but if your cafeteria workers are really paying attention to the kids, and I'm going to give you an example. At one school, we didn't identify anything. A cafeteria worker identified a couple students that weren't showing up to get their lunch food. And they actually sparked an investigation, and they found out there was a bullying issue, that the kids were afraid. There was 2 of them, and they were like 3rd and 4th graders. Were afraid to come to the cafeteria. And it was a cafeteria worker that identified that. She was so integral to the culture of that team and been with them for so long. She identified an issue and she fixed it, and it was awesome sauce. You could have this with custodians, you could have this with bus drivers, but maybe you don't. Like, I don't know. You could have a bunch of bus drivers that don't interact and engage. I just think that make sure that you're looking at the actual culture, not just the cost. And I know we've got to be very fiscally prudent nowadays. So you might have to ruffle some feathers, because we've got to make sure that those core things that support students' education is what we do best. Everything else we should consider more cost-effective ways to do it, either internally or externally. All right. So I want to talk about a couple examples, and then I'll give you a little checklist. All right. So there's some examples in Chicago public schools. Apparently, they had outsourced janitorial services, and to save money, right? Because they need to. But they got so many complaints about dirty schools and poorly trained staff doing it that it just dominated the headlines, and they had to deal with all this mess. So, that could happen with an internal team. It could happen with an external team. The issue is that management, right? And setting really clear expectations and making sure you're really creating like bulletproof contracts that you can just kneecap the vendor if they're causing these kind of problems, right? And I am a vendor, and I think that's important for you to be able to kneecap me if I mess up. Right? Now, I want you to pay your bills if I don't mess up, but let's be real. Okay. And then a district in New Jersey did successfully outsource intervention for like reading intervention tutoring. They only saw gains after creating a really tight-knit benchmarks and quarterly performance reviews for tutoring, and it worked. Okay, so I think, once again, clear standards. I don't know if Chicago didn't have clear standards enough. I don't know enough about it, but I think clear standards, bulletproof expectations, either way works, Okay, and then in rural Arkansas, an outsourcing of bus routes failed when a private vendor couldn't maintain consistent service. So, what does this mean? First, you're going to have your benchmark of what it would cost to insource. I think that's great. Start with your goals and make sure it's not just a cost issue. It's not just to grow your staff or to compress your staff, but it's really about performance and what your end goal is. And then you've got to choose partners based on the values, not just the price. And you've got to really dig in to make sure that what they say they can do, they can do. Have they done it before? Or is this a startup? And if you're going to do a startup and you're going to take a risk on them, well, that's your option as business leaders. But I wouldn't do the whole district. I would want to test the waters a little bit. I'd do a little pilot program. Maybe let them go get their feet wet on somebody else before they get their feet wet on you. Don't do a buddy a favor and get punched in the face later on because you allow to outsource it them. So, and don't just go with the cheapest price. Don't go with the most expensive price either, I would say. But figure out one that actually feels like it can accomplish the mission. And if you can get a price saving, all the better. Number 3, write good, strong contracts. Now, you're going to have enforceable contracts, but make sure that the standards and what you want is in it, right? If you expect the classrooms to be cleaned and you want them mopped every night, you got to mop. You can't say clean floors. You have to say, I want them. I was in the Army, so you got to be really basic sometimes. I want the floors swept first. I know this sounds so anal. I want the floors swept first. Then I want the floors mopped entirely, and once a week I want all the furniture pulled out, and I want them waxed. And you got to have some sort of standards because clean can mean two very different things to different people, very different. So I think we need to establish what does mowed mean. What does maintain mean? Well, I want you to mow it every 2 weeks, but what if the grass is rapidly growing? But that's all you've got, Or I want 33 mows a year. And I want you to use them, vendor, based on the best needs of how the grass is mowing. Look, all those things are clearer than, maintain our grass, right? Because somebody could say, I'm maintaining your grass, but I'm only going to cut it once a month. And if you in the South, it's going to be, 9 inches tall or something like that. It's going to look terrible. So very clear standards. And number 4, you've got to appoint a person to be in charge of the vendor, not check in on the vendor, not assigning the vendor, not picking the vendor, but literally working with the vendor to make sure the vendor is successful. And this is really critical. You should want the vendor to be successful. If you don't want the vendor to be successful, do not hire the vendor. You've got to train your team. And I know a lot of them like this, but a lot of people aren't like this. A lot of people think I gave it to the vendor and I don't care if it's successful or not because it's their problem and it's their fault. It's not my fault. We can't do that to the children. Your job is too important. Your job as an educator is too important to point fingers at internal people or external. Leaders take responsibility for everything that's around them. All right. And so if you outsource this, make a person to be in charge of I call them a success coach. Don't you want that vendor to be successful? Don't you want them to win? You took all the trouble as a school to outsource something. You've got to put somebody in charge of making it win, not a manager. I don't like this term manage. A winning coach, a leader in charge of them is a much better phrase. So I'm trying to get away from this term manager in my life because manage people, you can't just manage little things like putting them, like building a puzzle and managing the puzzle. I don't even know what that means. I need a leader. I want people to lead people to success and victory. And we need vendors, to the extent we use them, to do a great job so that we can reduce our cost. So you better coach them for success. If you just put your hands back, and look, I have failed at this with vendors. I was just talking about one earlier here. We didn't coach that vendor up, and it was our fault. But that's happened to us too. Where we don't have any points of contact after we enter a contract with somebody. We have to say no to them. Man, we gotta work together to win. We gotta work together to be successful. So start having that mindset, right? And then look, you really want to check outcomes regularly. Is that quarterly, monthly? It depends on the contract. But if it's not saving money, improving services, you can always go back. You can always change your mind. within the parameters of the contract, right? But it's okay to try one thing one year and try another thing another year, as long as you're doing the main thing, which is I'm focused on educating the children. I'm focused on providing them the best, and we're going to have to test some things out. And every school district in every area is going to be different. Some places have got really strong outsource vendors in one type of category and none in another. You got to look into your own space and figure out what may or may not work. But be open to trying to explore new things. And I'm going to kind of end with this. You got to think about this outsourcing and insourcing as a leadership tool. It's just a tool in your toolkit, and it's only effective on how you use it and how you coach it. All right. So before you outsource, say, are we doing this to save money or to serve the students better? And it probably ought to be both. All right. Thanks.